Given Bloober Team's spotty track record up till now, and Konami's recent history, it wasn't surprising that Silent Hill 2's remake had been met with the level of skepticism that it had been. But credit where credit's due, the survival horror title has very thoroughly proven its many doubters wrong, including ourselves here at GamingBolt. From how faithfully it recreates the best aspects of the legendary 2001 original, to how it expands on it with its gameplay and design tweaks and additions, there's a lot to love about Bloober Team and Konami's remake of Silent Hill 2. Of course, anytime a new survival horror remake of this kind comes out, it's unavoidably going to be compared to Resident Evil 2's seminal 2019 remake, which has had a huge role to play in the resurgence of horror games and remakes in general, with Silent Hill 2 itself having clearly taken heavy inspiration from the modern classic. Pitting the two against each other, which one actually comes out on top? Here, that's exactly what we're going to go over. Combat and boss fights. Obviously, combat is an area where traditionally Silent Hill has never been at its strongest, and one where Resident Evil 2 conversely usually has been. We're not going to beat around the bush here. RE2 definitely comes out on top as far as the combat is concerned. There's a solid variety in the weapons on offer, especially the unlockable ones that add so much more replay value. Each weapon comes with appropriate heft and oomph, the incredible gore system makes each action feel unbelievably visceral, and the boss fights are some of the best we've seen in the genre. But though Silent Hill 2's combat isn't quite on the same level, it is better than many would have expected. Just like in the original, the combat isn't really the point in Silent Hill 2's remake, but it definitely does feel surprisingly good thanks to tense encounters against excellently designed enemies. The boss battles too have seen notable improvements over the original game, which is another big point in the game's favor. Story and storytelling. Again, it would be foolish to not simply cut to the chase here because there's really not much of a competition. In terms of story and storytelling, RE2 can't really hope to compete against Silent Hill 2. The latter is a psychological horror masterpiece, one that tells a bold and unforgettable story that's likely to leave you an emotional wreck as it is to chill you to your very core. Heavy themes are handled brilliantly thanks to solid writing and specifically with the remake, incredible acting performances. Silent Hill 2 has always been regarded as one of the best stories ever told in a game, and the remake certainly does justice to that sort of praise. Resident Evil 2, on the other hand, is not a game that cares too much about its story. Of course, for fans of the franchise in particular, there is a lot to like here, from the setting of Raccoon City to the introduction of fan-favorite characters like Leon S. Kennedy and Claire Redfield, to other beloved personalities like Ada Wong, William Birkin, and others making their marks as well. But even at its very best, Resident Evil 2's story is functionally something that's meant to facilitate the gameplay and design, rather than the other way around. There's a huge gulf between what it does and what Silent Hill 2 accomplishes. Puzzles. Now we get to a category where the two games we're looking at are much more evenly matched. Silent Hill 2 and Resident Evil 2 are both among the most prominent foundational titles for the survival horror genre. And sure enough, they do both put quite a lot of emphasis on puzzles. What's more, the way both remakes approach their puzzles is also rather similar. Both bring over plenty from the originals, but also make changes and additions to keep the experience fresh while still feeling faithful, so that ever-returning fans won't simply walk through a challenge that's posed. There is a case to be made that simply by virtue of being what it is, Silent Hill 2 should take the cake here. As a series, Silent Hill tends to be more focused on puzzles than Resident Evil 2 tends to be, and Silent Hill 2 in particular is a game that heavily focuses on long puzzles that span lengthy sequences of the game. Sure, the same can be said about Resident Evil 2, and yes, the puzzles there are well designed as well, but Silent Hill 2 does give much more weightage to that part of the gameplay experience, and it does show just as it does with the combat in RE2. Level design and exploration. Again, this is an area where Resident Evil 2 and Silent Hill 2 are quite evenly matched, not only because of how good both of them are, but also because both have very similar design philosophies. Both titles emphasize slow-paced and deliberate exploration, encouraging players to gradually comb through areas, backtrack to older locations, keep an eye out for shortcuts and the like. exploration remains incredibly compelling in both titles, to say the very least. Resident Evil 2 does edge it, however, probably because it does a better job balancing the rewards that it gives out for exploration. From ammo and health to crafting resources, items, notes, and even collectibles, there's just a larger and more satisfying variety of things that Resident Evil 2 rewards players' desire to explore with. The level design is also generally just much tighter and more meticulously thought out throughout the entire experience, from the RPD building to Nest and more. Setting. It's next to impossible to split Resident Evil 2 and Silent Hill 2 in this particular category. On one hand, you have the town of Silent Hill, a seemingly quaint American town that's perpetually covered in an ominous mist and never fails to torture the people that roam its streets with reflections of their own twisted traumas and experiences. From its narrative and thematic depth of the strong visual aesthetic it's associated with, the town of Silent Hill is an incredible setting, and at its very best in the Silent Hill 2 remake, where it comes alive with gorgeous visuals and an incredible level of attention to detail. Not many horror settings would be able to compete with something like that. But then you have Resident Evil 2, which ranks among the upper echelons of the genre in this particular area. The RPD building is an iconic horror setting, one that's expanded and brought to life in particular fashion in the 2019 remake. Outside of RPD, you also get to explore Raccoon City itself, which is equally as iconic, if not more so, as well as other excellently crafted locations in the grimy underground sewers of the city and the horrifying umbrella lab known as Nest. Which of the two games you prefer is likely going to be a matter of taste and preference, but purely for its thematic depth, as well as how visually outstanding and conceptually unique it is, we're gonna have to go with the town of Silent Hill here. Enemies. The roster of enemies that you cross paths with can make or break a survival horror game, and both Resident Evil 2 and Silent Hill 2 do a lot to impress on that front, and both games boast some of the most iconic enemy designs that we've ever seen. From Silent Hill 2's Pyramid Head to Resident Evil 2's Lickers, among others. And though the narrative context surrounding them does give them an inherent boost, the enemies in Silent Hill 2 are also not as fun to fight as the enemies in Resident Evil 2 are, thanks to the latter's strength in combat, which arguably gives the latter an advantage in this area. Looking at individual enemies in RE2 also showcases the game's strengths on this front. For starters, you obviously have Mr. X, a relentlessly terrifying foe who stops at nothing in his attempts to terrify the living daylights out of you. He stalks you for the significant chunks of the game, and hearing his booming footsteps echoing through the halls of RPD never loses impact. Then you have the horrific Lickers, the nightmarishly mutated William Birkin, and the many forms that he takes throughout the games, and hell, even regular zombies, which are some of the most decrepit and creepy zombies we've ever fought in a game. From their visual design to their unique threats that they pose to how engaging they are to take on from a gameplay perspective. RE2's enemies and enemy types deserve to take the win here. Scariness and Atmosphere. An obviously crucial category for survival horror games, and one where both Resident Evil 2 and Silent Hill 2 succeed, though to different degrees. That both games are great at scaring players is undeniable. Scariness can of course be highly subjective, but both remakes do an excellent job of building tension and atmosphere, and making players feel on edge. Whether that's through atmospheric lighting, well-crafted environments, masterful pacing, impeccable sound design, or what have you. If, however, we were to pick one between the two games as the winner in this category, Silent Hill 2 would probably edge it. The dark corridors of RPD, the shrieks of the Lickers, the unending pursuit of Mr. X, all of that stuff is undeniably terrible. But from the town's oppressive fog to the narrative weight that it injects into the experience to the emphasis it places on slow, palpable psychological horror rather than conventional scares, Silent Hill 2 succeeds at delivering a much longer-lasting brand of chills. Tech. Again, both games deserve massive props in this area. The developer has done an incredible job with Resident Evil 2 in the tech department, while Bloober Team 2 has impressed with Silent Hill 2, which isn't surprising because this is the one area where the studio has had an inarguably excellent track record over the years. Admittedly, any game that gets picked as a winner between these two would do so on a razor-thin margin, if that. If we have to split hairs in that fashion, however, we'd probably go with Resident Evil 2. Silent Hill 2 does an incredible job with recreating the oppressive and atmospheric locations of its eponymous setting, and does so with an impressive level of attention to detail. But RE2 is just a cut above, even 5 years on from its launch. One of the biggest reasons for that is the incredible gore system on display in this masterpiece. From the way the zombies' bodies gradually disintegrate with damage to the morbidly gorgeous explosions of red that you get to witness when you blast an enemy in the head with a shotgun from close range, that stuff adds to the heavy experience, especially given the genre that we're operating in. Overall, call it a cop-out, but hey, we're 4-4 so far. Calling this competition a tie would feel cheap though, because depending on which of the two horror styles presented here you prefer, it's very likely that you're going to have a clear preference between the two games as well. But that's the thing, Silent Hill 2 and Resident Evil 2, in spite of how similar they are in so many ways, are also ultimately very different kinds of experiences, and which of the two you end up liking more will depend heavily on exactly what you're looking for. If what you want is a game that makes a narrative impact and attempts to unsettle you not only with conventional horror methods, which it certainly doesn't lack in, mind you, but also more cerebral and psychological ones, Silent Hill 2 is obviously going to be the better way to go. James Sunderland's story is a shocking one, and one that you absolutely should experience, and Bloober Team's remake does a spectacular job of retelling that story, while also expanding on the original title's gameplay experience. If, however, the thing that you're looking for is more mechanically dense, Resident Evil 2 really can't be beaten. Don't get me wrong, Silent Hill 2 is no walking sim, far from it, but the pure survival horror gameplay on offer in Resident Evil 2 is unmatched, with everything from the stellar level design and gory combat to the excellent boss fights and, of course, the relentless Mr. X Stalker sections coming together in perfect harmony to deliver a non-stop thrill ride. Personally, I tend to go for the latter, so Resident Evil 2 would have my vote. But for Silent Hill 2 to be in the same conversations as Resident Evil 2 is unbelievably high praise in and of itself. Hey, did you know that we at GamingBolt upload new videos every day? Stick around, drop a like, subscribe, and hit that bell, and let us know what kind of content you'd like to see in the future with a comment below.